repeat the non-conformist oath. I promise to be different. I promise to be unique. I promise not to repeat things other people say.
And welcome back to another episode of Positive Blatherings. And before I get to our very special guest today, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Legacy Casts. Legacy Cast is something that we record here at Rockvox Recording and Production. And being that the holidays are coming up, I thought it would be a great idea for you to give the gift of a legacy. Basically, what a Legacy Cast is, it's a video memoir. You invite family members, your grandfather, your father, your mother, anybody in your family who has a story, which is everybody, and you come and you sit down and you have a conversation and we record it professionally. You can also have one of our professional interviewers do an interview just like it's a news interview, and you get the stories from the perspective of the people who lived them. And it's a great gift and it lasts forever. Visit rockvox.com or yourlegacycast.com for more information. Okay, so today's guest, I'm very excited about. Now, let me tell you that I've been very candid about my recovery. I'm going on 4 years sober now, and I talk about it whenever it's applicable to what I'm saying, which is every day. And whenever I have the opportunity to witness someone who's gone through the same struggle or has fought that battle, I'm interested in it, be it a book, a movie, a story, whatever it is. And I was flipping through Audible one day and I saw an audiobook titled Drunk Mom. And I was like, oh, that looks interesting. And so I started listening to it, and immediately I was hooked. It was written by Jowita Bydlowska, who lives in Toronto. She's from Poland. And it talks about her struggles with addiction and after she had her son. And it's really honest and raw, and I love her writing style, and I immediately reached out, and I was lucky enough to be able to arrange a conversation with her. She has a new book out called Possessed, and this is great because I get to sit down and have a nice conversation with Jowita Bydlowska. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Blathering, Jowita.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm, like I said before we started recording, a little bit nervous today. Just, it's rare for me coming from a radio background and having to do quite a few high profile interviews. But when the person I'm interviewing has a personal connection to me from their story or whatever, I get those jitters. So that's where I'm at right now. But I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me on the Blathering. This podcast is really about positivity, and because I'm 3.5 years sober, sobriety comes into play in the theme of this podcast quite a bit. So I love to connect with people who have, embraced sobriety and have made it work for them in incredible ways. And you're a perfect example of that. You wrote, you're a writer, you wrote a couple of books that really connect with people, and you have just really honest and raw style that I absolutely love.
Thank you so much for saying that. So I love that the title of this podcast is Blathering, because I tend to blather. So I'm in the right space here, and yeah, I don't know. I have jitters too, and it's good to have them, and hopefully we'll walk through them and see what happens.
Right. So I know that you just released a new book called Possessed.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get to that. I do want to talk about that. I do want to go back to Drunk Mom, which you published in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And that is a memoir about your life dealing with addiction, alcoholism, and when you had your son. and how that all played. Can you give me a quick background just for those who haven't read the book? And you better read the book, but give them just a sense.
Yes. So the book is called Drunk Mom. My name is Jowita Bydlowska. It's pronounced differently than it's spelled, but hopefully you can provide your listeners with the correct spelling, because yeah, it doesn't sound anyway. So sort of backstory. So I mean, before I identify myself as a person with substance use disorder or anything else, I would call myself a writer, first of all, and that's what I was back then before I even started writing the book and before I became a mother. So I went to journalism school. I tried my hand at writing short stories, obviously, just regular journalism, mostly feature articles. But also what I really wanted to do was to write a novel. I always thought that would be the sort of the coolest thing to do, to have a book out there with all my blathering, turned into thoughts and stories, possibly. So what happened is, after I gave birth to my son, and during my 11 months of my relapse into drinking, I was working on what at that time I considered a novel. And I thought, what better character than some kind of an ordinary villain? I kind of went with that idea that, I don't want to write about someone who is, I don't know, a bank robber or something spectacular.
Right.
I thought, what about these people that live, next to us or in our neighborhood, or we know them in our families, and they do something that's completely unacceptable and secretive, and what could that be? So interestingly enough, I kind of had a personal insight into this thing, because I was doing something that was secretive and to me at that time morally unacceptable, and I was still struggling with it, and that was drinking while taking care of an infant. But like many people with substance use disorder, especially with alcohol, I was very much in denial about my drinking. I had all kinds of different methods of trying to sort of juggle both, parenting and drinking, and, staying sober, and then trying not to drink, and then taking care of the baby. So I would like to say, because I mean, it sounds so horrific, a new mom taking care of a baby and getting trashed. I mean, if you read my book, you'll see that I very unsuccessfully, but try to have some kind of a schedule even around that. So drinking, taking care of a baby, writing a novel. And then after I got sober, when my son was, after he turned 1 year old, I started speaking to a literary agent, and I was telling him about this novel that I almost had a draft of. And I said, all this happened. And then I can't remember how it happened, but we started talking about, our personal lives. And I kind of confessed that it was based on a true story, more or less. And then sort of from that conversation, I went into, well, would you be willing to tell this story, with your name and I guess your face attached to it, and not have it as fiction? Because, with fiction, you can sort of hide behind the story. You can say, oh yeah, of course, this is not about me. But with a memoir, it's a totally different beast,
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow. So that's interesting. So it actually started off as a narrative, as fiction novel, and then how much of it did you have to go back and rewrite a lot of it to make it suit the memoir style, or was it a big rewrite?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking this. Not many people ask, because I think there was a interviewer once on NPR who said, "Well, how do we know that you're not lying?" Because
well,
yeah, exactly. I mean, I didn't have to change a lot, because I think probably for very sort of, practical, logistical reasons, I really was writing what I knew. And the biggest struggle was to actually go back and recreate the dialogue. That was kind of not a struggle, but it was a challenge, because obviously with fiction you can let yourself have all kinds of dialogue, but trying to remember conversations and all that stuff is difficult. So the way I sort of went around it, I didn't put anything in quotation marks. In other words, sort of to almost protect myself as a journalist, so that it would not be fact checked. But another part of that whole thing is that I had I was writing a journal, what I at that time sort of called, taking notes, doing research, but it was journal. So I had that to sort of rely back on with, making sure that I got my facts straight and dates and everything else. And then the biggest sort of help or advantage was that I did write it, or I sort of finished it within, a very short period of time. So I had the draft down, but then the sort of the final product that we were sending out to publishers, that only took, a couple of months. And then of course I worked with an editor to make it, what it is today. But yeah, so it was time and having those sort of journalistic instincts, and then being, kind of creative with the dialogue, for sure.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to mention that the style in which it's written is very interesting. It was interesting to me because it was definitely you telling it felt like a journal. It had a lot of aspects that reminded me of journaling, and I've always been amazed and really in awe of anyone that can write a memoir. And I know that your memoir, Drunk Mom, is really about a period of time in your life, and it's not, a life story. But still, I'm a big fan of memoirs. That's probably my most favorite type of book to read, or audiobook to listen to. So when I hear someone's firsthand accounts of their entire life, especially, a celebrity or something, and they go back 35, 40 years and talk about stories of something that happened between this person and that person, and they have quotes and stuff. I'm just amazed by that, because I try to think back to when I was a kid, to when I was a teenager. I remember like 4 things. I can't remember anything. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I think, so I actually, it's funny that you say the word. I wanted to stay away from this whole idea of journaling or blogging. So, it is, to say that I used a journal to sort of help it, that's one part.
Yeah.
I think I did have this idea that as I was writing it as a memoir, that it's like almost like a conversation I would have with someone, because,
Yeah.
people who have addiction and have people in their life who don't understand addiction often have to explain what it's like, and I had this idea that this would be sort of like a explanation of, what it's like to be in this crazy brain of an addict in active addiction. Like, how would you explain to an alien what it's like to be human, almost? So it's like, I also had this idea to write it in present tense, so it was immediate, so it was almost like sometimes when people hijack a conversation and I'm like, I got to tell you the story. So it's like almost grabbing someone by their, I don't know, shoulders, and like telling them this truth. So there was urgency to it that was definitely deliberate. And another thing is, I also didn't want to, some of the criticism was that people were like, well, what was it like in your childhood? And how did you, was there trauma? Was there this? Was there that? So I dealt with that in one chapter that I called Archaeology, where I sort of very tongue-in-cheek went through all my traumas and kind of almost said to a reader, take your pick, whichever one you want. It could be all of them, could be nothing, could be just because I was bored. Who knows? We're still debating what addiction is till this day. So, so there were a few things about that were deliberate in order to sound very conversational and I hope approachable.
Yeah, I didn't think twice about trying to reach out to you to find to see if you can be on the podcast and just connect with you, because you do seem very approachable. And this is what I got from Drunk Mom was with the whole addiction, with that the addiction brain. The fact that, and your mind, you can convince yourself anything. You can convince yourself that anything is okay, that anything is fine, it's amazing to me what our brains go through. So with that in mind, I wanted to ask you, how has your writing style, or if it has, did it change in any way, your process in writing, from before your sobriety until after you've been sober?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I first thing I want to say to that is that I absolutely cannot write drunk or high. I think there's this kind of mythology that, a lot of artists, especially writers, are, these sort of that we get trashed and then we come up with these beautiful
Right, like
passages and stuff.
Hemingway
So
or something.
exactly. But for me, it never worked. I certainly tried it. It never ever works. But I mean, I don't know if sobriety. I mean, I can only again write sober. I don't have to have a special sort of setting or mood or anything like that in order to be able to write. I can I'm pretty lucky. I don't really have a lot of so-called writer's block. I know that my I hope my writing has improved, not necessarily from Drunk Mom, because I do think that Drunk Mom is possibly my best writing up to date, but certainly with writing fiction after that, there have been a lot of challenges, but also a lot more opportunities because, as I said before, writing fiction does allow you a certain freedom and it's very liberating. And especially as approachable as I am, I did feel a little bit too approached, especially in the first year, because I was getting, emails and everyone was, asking me how I got sober, what did I do? And I kind of usually would say to that, I give you my memoir. I hope that's enough. I'm not a professional. I don't represent AA or I don't represent any other entity. So
Right.
um, but then, yeah, with fiction, my second book was it's called Guy, and I wrote it from a point of view of a 27-year-old male, childless, sort of a asshole cat who's definitely a character from before Me Too movement, who's really unapologetic about his dealings with women. And the reason why I picked that character is because I wanted to be as far removed from drunk mom or motherhood or anything to do with myself as possible. And it worked. I mean, and then this recent book is another kind of like, I don't know. I mean, I think some writers write about the same thing over and over in different forms. Others, try different ways. I mean, I certainly would consider myself more of a literary writer. I am thinking about writing another nonfiction book, definitely not a memoir, but one that I think would appeal to people with addiction and other issues. And yeah, trying to book about shame and what shame is, which is a huge
Oh
component
man.
of addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a big story right there.
yeah, yeah.
I love fiction writing. You saw me chuckle when you said you're fortunate you don't get writer's block, and I'm the poster child for writer's block. You look up writer's block and there's me, like, because I've been trying to write. I used to try to fool myself and call myself a writer, but now I don't do that because writers write. So if you're not writing, you're not a writer. You can be like kind of a writer in your heart, but so we have my business partner here and I have a movie that's on Amazon Prime called Bottom Feeders. And
Okay.
it's a script that Steve Miller wrote back in 2001, and we made it a couple of years ago because we were like two guys pushing 50 saying we've got to get a movie done. It's just like as an author, for you wanting to write novels, that drive, right? That desire that you have to create this. Like, this is something that you have to do. And we felt the same way. So we made this film. And when I was writing as a part of a team, I could very easily come up with things and tighten up the dialogue or zest it up or whatever you want to say. But when I sit down to try to write something, if I have an idea in my head, I sit down and start to write. And I don't know, 10 pages, 12 pages in, something happens in it. I think it actually gets hard, and then I get discouraged.
Yeah.
Do you have times like that when it just gets hard?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Because I think, it's interesting that you're talking about writing with a partner, which to me, I've never tried it. I think it would be fun, but it does sound scary. But another thing, the whole process of writing, whether books or scripts or anything, and doing it by yourself, it is extremely isolating activity, and you have to be isolated. When I say I don't need a special setting or anything like that, that means I can, I don't need to sit by the water and have special music playing and eat a donut or something. But I do certainly need still some kind of a space to be able to do that. But then, what happens when you're sitting inside your own head for hours and hours and hours, and then if you do have issues like addiction or any sort of obsessive thinking, like you can channel that obsessiveness into writing or anything else, but at the same time there's a lot of voices within you, and I think that's what it's not even the story, and I think the idea of putting things on paper that gets confusing. It may be just this idea that it's suddenly really noisy and it's just you like it's fucked, so it's really it's a crazy exercise. And I mean, I have my little tips and tricks. I know how to sort of ease myself into it all. And I do wanted to touch on something because when we started talking, you said you want this sort of this podcast about positivity. And one thing that I do always teach, like my students, for example, is that you have to find joy in whatever you're doing. So if it's writing, if you're not enjoying it, and by the way, it's not an enjoyable process, even with, obviously I'm talking about voices in your head and things like that, but there has to be some joy. And this joy is, whether you imagine yourself creating a cover for this thing that doesn't exist yet, or whether it's, this idea that you're going to read those 2,000 words that you put on paper, or whatever it is, like there has to be 100% joy. I'm not going to argue with anyone who says that it's blood, sweat, and tears, but I still think that if it's only, then it's possibly not worth doing, because life is short. So yeah.
Yeah, that's very well said. And I think sometimes, at least for me, I forget that aspect of it, that it's supposed to be joyful. It's supposed to be, expression of your soul in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And when it becomes a difficulty, when it becomes a challenge, too much of a challenge, I think sometimes I get afraid, it scares me off, and I'm like, oh, this is too much work. But I like that idea of it. It's joyful. It's a joyful process, and that's the way it's supposed to be. Is you mentioned students, and I know I saw your bio that you're you teach at in college, right? University.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you always had that desire to be a teacher and to kind of impart your knowledge on other people, or was that a new thing?
Never. I never thought of myself in that way. I don't like standing in front of people. I don't like having to manage, multiple personalities. But then, so I was asked by one of my former profs to join this one particular class, and then I sort of, I didn't fall into it. I certainly probably have enough experience and knowledge to pass on to students, and then I found this whole idea of I not the idea, but the feeling of being proud of what they create and seeing them progress. Like, I know it sounds cheesy, but that's,
Not at all.
That's probably the biggest reward. And, I'm not doing this so they like remember me 50 years from now or whatever. I'm just super happy when they like, I mean, we did an exercise where just a little creative exercise where they had to I think write a scene or a hook or something describing what happened when they first found out about COVID. And because everyone has some kind of emotional response to it or a situation, and they wrote these little tiny paragraphs, and and afterwards two of them came up to me and said, oh, I didn't know you could do this with writing and like write about yourself. And especially now in journalism, there's a lot of there's this trend where people do put themselves in a story, right, in first person. So I'm like, no, that's totally allowed, and this is what sort of opens you up to creativity. So that part I enjoy about teaching. Other parts, the public speaking and the remembering all the dates and assignments and all that boring, like I hate that. Yeah.
Well, once again, you're you're attracted to the joyful part of that, the sharing
Yeah.
and seeing someone else's happiness with what they've created. And, you know, the other stuff is like, yeah, I don't know about that, but
Yeah.
that's amazing. And I have had similar, experiences with teaching. Just this past summer, my daughter and I did a podcast camp for kids at the local science museum. And I was petrified going into it. I'm like, because they're 12 to 15 years old. I'm like,
Oh no, that's terrifying.
I'm like, they're
Those
going to
are-
skewer me. I'm going to be cringy. I don't know what, you know. And it turned out to be a lot of fun. And it was great for my daughter too, because she kind of came out of her shell and she was able to help. And these are pretty much her peers. There were kids around her age. She's 15. So there were kids in her age. And it became very joyful once I got past, you know, all the fear and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But so I could totally understand how that aspect of teaching, you know, is really gratifying.
Yeah. No, I think people also like I'm so glad you had that experience. I would totally be terrified of 12 to 15-year-olds. My son is 13 and he's just one person who I know very well and he terrifies me. It's just he can just say okay in a way that like undermines every accomplishment or anything I've ever done. It's just one word, okay. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm done. I'm a piece of shit. But no, but this idea to yeah, this idea of sort of standing in front of people, like I don't know if you had a lot of participation in your camp, but like another part of my terror is that when there's no participation and they just kind of stare at you.
Oh gosh, I know. That was terrible. That happened quite a few times. Anyone?
No, and you can't force them. Like I found when I was teaching on Zoom, I had all their names and all their little squares in front of me, so I could be like, you know, Megan, Kate, Peter, whatever. Like I could sort of do this like really naturally. But when it's like in person in front of class, and I can't again force them to speak, and you know we're discussing a story structure or something, and I'm asking a question, and all I get is 23 pairs of eyes just kind of looking at me skeptically, and I want to just run for the hills. So, yeah.
What would you, being we're talking about students and imparting knowledge, what kind of advice, what advice would you give someone today who's looking to be a writer? What's like the most important piece of advice you'd give them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, depending on, whether you want to, like, if you do want to write to be published, like one of the things that, I taught in workshops and talks is that, you do have to let people know that you're doing this in the way that you're actually writing. So like, this used to, back in my day, people used to have blogs, that would become really popular. I actually had a parenting blog about sort of all the ways in which we, fuck things up when raising our kids. When we, it was called They Don't Tell You. It became really popular. I only like kept it for a year, but it's just sort of, that's like getting your foot in a door and, finding your niche, finding your audience. And it's also very gratifying if people comment, even if it's one or two comments like that's something. And then people do this with Instagram now and with social media. So that's probably number one advice, because I think the biggest encouragement for anyone is to have an audience and to have someone confirm that what you're doing is not completely stupid. So even if you think it's stupid and maybe no one's going to read it, like, I would say just keep doing it. That's probably the best advice. And from then on, it really depends on how serious you want to be with it. I mean, I when I decided that I wanted to write books, very specifically books, I applied and paid a lot of money to go to journalism school, only because I didn't know about MFA programs. I didn't know about creative writing programs. And the only place that I knew where people wrote for money was journalism. So I thought, okay, well, I'll do this, 2-year master's program and then see what happens and find some connections and maybe do this in some way and then weasel my way into fiction writing somehow. And it worked. It took a while, but it worked. So
that's a new book for you. Weaseling your way into writing.
To writing, yeah. Title of my workshop.
Do you continue to do workshops now?
Yeah, I do. I mean, not when I teach at university, because that's like my class runs for 6 hours plus two, and then that's like me standing in front of them. It's brutal, but and then there's a lot of grading and there's a lot of consultation. So I try to just sort of put all my energy and attention there. But other than that, no, I've done memoir workshops. I do mentoring. I have, clients who need help with editing. It's really yeah, I mean, I mean, the way to also do this is if someone, reaches out and they want some kind of help, whether it's mentorship or editing, I usually ask for sort of a sample writing, and that gives me an idea of, if I'm gonna have fun working with them or if they should go somewhere else. I mean, yeah, so it does happen. I'll let you know if there's there's one coming up.
And is it more of a personality thing when you
Yeah.
when you do that? So if the personality of the person
Yeah.
doesn't gel with you, that's going to make it a difficult
Yeah.
environment.
And that too, but I mean, I recently have I had this really accomplished academic reach out about a book that he's working on, and he sort of just struggled with like meeting his own goals and deadlines, and but he also wanted to make his book more, I guess, conversational, less academic, I guess, less dry. So he I think he read Drunk Mom, or he read something of mine, said, "Oh, I want to give my book a little bit of edge." So he sort of hired me almost like a consultant more than an editor. And then he sent me a sample of his writing, and I was completely blown away by the way he wrote. So it was like that was like a, capital letters yes for me, because I thought I'm gonna love what he's writing. He's gonna love my feedback. It's gonna be like an easy fit. But also, I mean, if someone's just starting out, and like I had another writer who was sort of doing this hybrid between poetry and memoir, totally like not my style, but we also sort of got along, and she had goals. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing with students is like, I would say with any workshops and the ones that I've joined and the ones that I taught, like you should have a goal in mind, because I don't think it's the teacher's job to tell you what you want to do, because like no one can figure this out for you. I mean, if it's like, oh, I wrote this thing and all my friends loved it, I don't know what to do with it. It's kind of like, I don't know what to do with it. You're
Yeah.
you're your own expert. So yeah,
Yeah.
so have an idea. Yeah.
What how does discipline uh factor into your writing, into what you're doing?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I tell people, and then I can talk about what it's really like. So I
Oh
think
yeah, okay.
well, I tell people that if writing or anything is something that you want to pursue, you should treat it as a job. So in other words, if you would come into the if you also if you have financial means, in Canada, a lot of writers, sort of in my situation, and I'm a single parent in a very expensive city, so I do have to support myself. I have to support my writing habit, better than a drinking habit.
Yes.
So in order for me to support that, I have to apply for grants. So we do have those sort of opportunities. They're very far and few in between. But let's say you got a grant for 4 months, or you have some kind of, uh, cash injection, $20,000 to do just whatever the hell you want for. Yeah, like treat it like a job. Come into sit at the same place, office, home office, or whatever, from 9 till 5. Have lunch and write. And I mean, some days. Listen, the new season of Blind Love was just released today, so I'd be watching that instead of writing in the next 2 days. But also, like so that's my discipline. My discipline is that I now allow myself to take breaks, because some days I just know I'm not going to produce anything. Like you
Hmm.
probably know what it's like. You're
Yep.
like, I can't. One day I can write 5,000 words, another day I'm like, I can't write. I don't even know what words mean. Like my brain just suddenly decides to go on vacation, right? I'm
Right.
like, oh yeah.
That's interesting. I've heard that from other writers as well, that you have to show up, and you have to set hours for yourself and treat it like it's a job. I'm gonna come in at 9 o'clock. I'm gonna work for 3.5 hours, and then I'm gonna take a break, and then I'm go back. And I tried that, and I realized that that's really really hard. It's
But
really,
how we have
especially
those jobs too. I mean, I'm sure I've had many jobs where like it's not only hard, but it's boring. So if you
right,
sort of
right.
like I've had data entry jobs, where I would just sit there mindlessly do something for 8 hours. I wanted to run and I wanted to leave and I wanted to, I would cry at my desk. But if you think about this idea, you talked about discipline. If you think about this idea that there's some kind of, imaginary boss watching you, you're gonna sit at that desk. So you're not gonna quit because you're like, I'm not only it's not only my time, which is money, but it's also like I'm spending this grant money or whatever I set aside. And every time I, take off for 3 hours or whatever, that's money wasted. So I mean, maybe that could work for some people in sort of practical sense, but yeah, like most jobs are not fun. This is a job. It's not fun sometimes.
Well, there's also that saying that, if you love what you do, then it's not a job. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think they have jobs where you get to sleep for money, but I mean, that would be my job.
Right. Sleep, have a late breakfast, watch TV. Yeah, that's
Amazing.
perfect.
I'm into it.
So you just had a new book come out named Possessed, and
Mhm.
I saw on Facebook that you just shared a review that I thought was good. I can't remember it now off the top of my head, but um, before we get to the book, how you seem to have a very humorous approach to reviews, and I think you take them with a grain of salt. Is that true?
Yeah, and I'm thinking of Goodreads reviews, which is I also yeah, Goodreads reviews are sort of this is where, readers who get the first sort of dibs on a novel go, and then so publisher usually will send out these free copies for people to review them to sort of, generate a buzz.
Oh, okay.
Um, and those reviews are, good and bad and everything in between, like any review. So the ones that I do find particularly entertaining are the ones where, someone will say things like, "Oh, I give 2 stars out of 5. This book had too many explicit sex scenes, and I didn't enjoy this character, but maybe it was just because I had a flu and I wasn't feeling well." So
Yeah,
there's this.
yeah. They're like, well, at least they qualified it, and they
Yeah, and I have a few reviews where someone's like, actually no, the best review I had was actually not on Goodreads, but it was in a newspaper, Canadian newspaper, national newspaper, and someone complained about my book Guy, which is I was inspired sort of by American Psycho, Bret Easton Ellis. It's a very specific, very masculine book. So this person wrote this whole review, and in the end sort of said, maybe I didn't like it because I was looking for Mr. Darcy and Jane Austen. And I thought, well, who the fuck gave you this review in the first place? This is not what you're gonna get. So if you're reviewing I don't know, uh, books or whatever, you shouldn't be reviewing clothes. I don't, you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
I also have this other thing where this is more with Amazon, and I don't know if other writers do it, but when people give you shitty reviews on Amazon, it's fun to see what else they reviewed.
Yeah.
And so the best one was it was a horrible review. Someone like told me to this was for Drunk Mom, that I was a worthless addict and should get myself sterilized and all this kinds of abuse. And then I went to this person's reviews, and she had one other product, and it was a hamster cage lining, and she gave it 5 out of 5 stars. She said these wood chips were fantastic. My hamster loved it. She hated my book. So I thought, well, this is the quality of a reviewer here. So anyway,
Wow. That's all she had to contribute. Amazing.
my book is cursed. That's why my new book.
It's Possessed.
It's
So
completely 100% possessed.
so
I don't know if
so
you
tell
saw
me
that.
about it. Tell me about Possessed.
What did you see the noise on Facebook? Oh, not noise because I posted. So, this is what it looks like. I was the person behind the cover idea, but I had a great art designer to do it. So anyway, it is called Possessed. It's a bit of a nod to a famous cult movie called Possession by Andrzej Żuławski. Um, But yeah, it's a I would say it's a psychological thriller novel, definitely sort of more literary. Lots of as you sort of might have heard by my Goodreads review of Goodreads, there are some explicit sex scenes, but it's not a sex book. So I don't think they're very offensive. They're there for a reason, but it's essentially a story about a middle-aged woman, or I would say late 30s, who falls in love with someone who's 10 years younger, and then she who's kind of a fuckboy. He's definitely not nice with women, and she becomes completely obsessed with him, possessed. And also, she has two other relationships. One is with her senile mother, who's making her life hell, but she has to take care of her. Another one is with the sort of a former boyfriend who's still in her life. So in order to get away from all these sort of forces, and especially from her possessive, love situation triangle, she takes a trip. It's a work trip, and she goes to an island that's possibly haunted, and then meets another character, and then there's a bit more possession happening. So
Wow.
it weaves a it weaves a few genres, sort of yes, literary fiction, sort of a bleak kind of a novel that I would say is bit popular right now. It's dark. I mean, and then someone compared it to Alana Ferranta, which was a very kind comparison. I don't know if it's that. And then there's a little bit of horror, obviously. So I don't write in horror genre, but I wanted to include that element. It was important to this story. The most interesting story about this book is that the day before it was going to be published, I received a letter from a lawyer written on behalf of someone from life who I thought the character from this book is based on him, specifically the character of the younger man. So, as you can imagine, that was a very intense day for me, a very nerve-wracking. So things like that have been happening around this book, and but I guess it makes it more entertaining, and certainly, yeah,
It's like the Carly Simon song. You're so
yeah,
vain.
yeah, yeah.
You think this
Well, it
book's
was,
about you.
yeah. I mean, yeah, it was. This sort of letter happened in response to something else, because I was actually writing a story for a magazine called Men Think I Write About Them. And then I wanted to run a line by this person, and then he thought this was about the book. I mean, anyway, so I don't think I am getting sued. I did speak to a defamation lawyer who told me I don't need to worry about anything and to talk about it when I talk about the book. So here I am talking about it. But
Wow.
um, so I'm telling you, it is cursed. It's a cursed book.
Well, I'm is the audiobook out already?
It's going to be soon. I'm actually just in a process of talking about it right now. So I was hoping it would be same time as this, but yeah, so here's another delay. So there's just been delays and delays. I think you can possibly order it online now. I want to say you should be able to order for those who want to order. But like here locally, we had some delays even with distribution. There's a lot of delays with distribution because of COVID and other things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been eventful.
Never a dull moment.
No.
So you come across to me, and I know nothing. I don't know you, obviously, but based on your storytelling, based on your writing, I get this impression that you're a very passionate person. Like you have very intense passions, and that comes out in your writing. What do you, besides writing and your son, what's your biggest passion? Like, what are you most passionate about?
It's going to be a bad answer because I'm going to say my writing.
Well, no, that's okay. I just figured that was obvious answer.
Yeah, no, but I want to say that I am passionate about it in the way that I used to be, for example, passionate about drinking, right?
Right.
So I think my passion is being passionate about something and sort of, hyper focusing on that. Sometimes, I mean, even my book Possessed, it's not a book about addiction, but it is a book about these sort of forces that drive people that, I certainly are familiar to me for personal reasons. I mean, again, this book is fiction, but this idea that, someone can become obsessed to the point of like losing herself is certainly, I've experienced that with alcohol for sure, for example. So my passions are not drinking or writing necessarily, but I really like doing whatever it is that I'm doing. I mean, in terms of like a hobby, I guess I used to do a lot of photography, so I really got into it uh, around the time when my first book came out, because I found there was a lot of focus on like me as the author, and there was always, because a memoir, that's natural that happens. So I felt quite uncomfortable with it, and then I had this idea to do a bunch of self portraits. This is before the age of Instagram, so there were more artistic self portraits, really staged, with time camera, etc.
Hmm.
And then from then I sort of I want to say I didn't evolve in photography, but I started sort of getting into more and more simplistic photography. So when the pandemic struck, I really wanted to explore the medium of Polaroid, which I have this old camera, and I thought like, that sort of, because you had the same sort of gratification that you do with iPhone, right? You're like,
Right.
but it's still so limiting because you only have, these 100 photos and they don't come out right. They're not nothing, like you can't really apply filters.
Right.
It's a really fickle medium. Like I thought Polaroid were super easy, but I would say they're harder than like, because I've done film and I've developed film and everything else analog, but that one like really, really
Yeah,
challenged me.
you're
So
really limited with what you can do with the camera.
yeah, yeah.
You
I mean,
can't
there's like two settings.
manipulate the depth of field and all that kind of
No,
stuff. It's like,
yeah. But it was good because it was good. I do have a like an Instagram account I started. It didn't become anything. I just did it for myself. But I thought it was really good for the pandemic because, as you know, wherever you were, there were these very unusual things happening in our everyday environment. So suddenly, seating playgrounds with the, yellow tape, or, empty streets, like stores boarded up, like that was like a weird, weird 2 years or whatever, however long. And to be able to, photograph that, it was like a huge, huge opportunity.
yeah.
So like once the pandemic ended, I was like, I think I'm done with Polaroid. But I mean, but yeah.
So
So photography.
if is there one thing that you want to do that you haven't done yet, whether it's writing in a certain genre or some kind of thing that's kind of like your big
Mhm.
goal, like a bucket list type of thing? What would that be?
Yeah. I mean, I like everyone else, or most people really, really do want to travel more. I found, like with writing, I just, because it is so isolating and sedentary, I have all kinds of ideas of where to go. And I think I'm just going to give my permission to do that more. But in terms of writing and sort of a bucket list or something I really wanted to try, and I have tried it, is I strangely got into not strangely at all, but I got into self published writing, specifically a genre of erotica that I only found out about because there was a big article about a lawsuit that was happening between, it's a specific genre is called Omegaverse. So it's a niche thing, but it has a lot of readers, a lot of really passionate readers. What really interested me about this was that these readers are not like my readers. These readers communicate with each other. They have message boards. They exchange, information. They're sort of read books in like, one sitting. They're super like passionate and interested. So I always thought it would be amazing to and then I published one of those novels myself. I am never ever going to tell anybody what the title is or my pseudonym. But then I noticed people were reading it, and like, it was like it did okay. Like, so I would like to one day, hopefully soon, be a publisher of such books, but also bring them into more traditional publishing. Just because I really do respect and admire self-publishing writers. I actually, this is, most people think that it's, this is what happens where your writing goes to die, and I found that it's completely the opposite. The story, the tropes are the same. I mean, it is very specific genre, but the way, people create worlds and kind of explore their imagination is really like, it's astonishing. So yeah, Long answer. Sorry, I'm chatty today.
No, I love it. I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I'm sad that we have to wrap it up at some point here. Um, you know, like I said before, I record audiobooks here. That's part of what I do in my studio, and I've done about eight or nine different audiobooks. All but two have been self-published authors, and they all did their own narration too. So it was narrated by the
That's
author.
amazing.
And I absolutely love working with authors. I love working with writers. They're just a wonderful group of people. We always have the best conversations, and it's always so much fun to sit here and, because who better to read the book than the one who wrote it? I mean, they get through it so well.
Not me.
Not you? No.
No, because I have an accent. Maybe it's not coming out as strong, but it's like,
oh, I can hear your accent, but I don't.
You need to have like
that wouldn't bother me, especially. I mean, if the book was written by someone who didn't sound like their name didn't imply that they had an accent, like if it was Jennifer Smith, and then the narrator had your accent, then it would be like, oh, that's interesting. But if you narrated Drunk Mom, it would have totally worked. It would have been great, in my opinion.
Yeah, I just that was out of my hands. That was just something that was
right.
As with this publisher, it's just
they
arranged by the publisher.
They just do it. Yeah, I get it.
And no one asked me. They actually did ask me if I wanted to narrate Possessed, but again, my main character is me. It's supposed to be someone who was born and raised in Canada. I mean, I think her mother is from Poland, because I wanted to sort of include some kind of a Polish reference there. But other than that, no. But I agree, and my former partner, who's also an author, just narrated his second novel, and he had a great time. And it was, it made sense because he wrote it from a point of view of, someone who's kind of like him. And it was, so that worked out for him.
I really appreciate you taking the time today and to chat with me, to blather with me about your books. It was really, really fun. I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to Possessed. As soon as that audiobook comes out, I'm all over it. And is there an opportunity through your website to buy autographed copies of your books?
No, but that's a great idea. I'm going to set that up.
Okay.
I think that's a fantastic. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for giving it.
Awesome. Because I'm a big fan of yours now, and I look forward to more of your work, and I'm going to follow your career very closely.
Thank you.
Well, thanks
so much for this.
I appreciate your time, and all the best. Hope everything's okay with your son, and all that's good. And this was just a lot of fun. And so people can find you on your website, JowitaBydlowska.com.
My first and last name altogether.com. And I'm also on socials. I'm on Instagram and on Facebook. So
right. I know. I stalked you on Facebook, and you accepted my friend request. It was the first thing I did after I read Drunk Mom. I'm like, I got to find this person. So
no, glad you did.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate it. Have a good one.
Bye now.